Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and today I'm going to work on an Abu Garcia Cardinal Gold 62. It's a Gold Max. It's a freshwater reel, about the 20 or 30 size. It has an easy cast thumb function to it, where it'll always return so that as you cast, you release that lever, which will open up the bail, and then simply cranking the reel will reset the bail so you never have to touch the bail wire. This one seems to be high-end. It says 5 ball bearings, which is nice, and it's a size 2 reel, so it handles 4 and 6 pound tests, 2 4 and 6 pound tests at approximately 200 yards for 4 pounds. So it's typically a freshwater reel. I'm going to get started by taking the spool off, and then we'll open up the gearing, and I'll show you what this is made of and how to service it. So you remove the spool by taking off the drag knob, and this one's interesting. This has a drag clicker that's part of the drag assembly up top with ridges on the drag knob. That's opposed to a clicker that would normally be sitting on the spool. Okay, in order to remove the rotor, we pull the toothed ratchet for the anti-reverse to let you know the drag is running, and the 2 little shims that hold that in place. We pull them off, and as you'll notice, I'm putting my pieces and parts into a parts tray. In this case, it's the bottom of a milk jug, but I do that just so that I can keep all of those in one place and make it easy to find when I go to reassemble. The inside of the rotor is held in place by a 12mm nut. And this one actually is a reverse thread. So normally you would tighten by going clockwise. In this case, you loosen by going clockwise. And a lot of reel manufacturers will do that because the reel spins clockwise. And keeping the reel tight with that nut in a clockwise pattern is a preventative so that it doesn't loosen and cause the rotor to loosen along with it. Okay, after the nut is off, simply pull it off, and you can tell there's not much going on underneath here. Bail trip and simple spooling with a ramp here that returns that spool to the thumb set all the time, and 1 bearing. So we're going to talk about lubricating this reel, and this is simple. There is no anti-reverse, no instant anti-reverse. It's simply a pinion bearing. And I use an oil on bearings. We're going to use a Real X oil here, and just give it a good drink of oil up top. And then we're going to put this rotor right back on because, quite honestly, there's nothing more to do there. Take that, and now remember this nut was clockwise, so you tighten counterclockwise to put the nut back on, interestingly enough. And that's kind of odd. So I always tell folks, if you don't know which way the nut works, if you're trying to loosen the nut on the rotor and you're not having any success, don't try and over wrench it. Just take a quick turn and see if it happens to loosen by going contra. Okay, while we're at it, we're going to take off the spool. We'll take a look at the drag washers that are underneath there. They're held in place by a spring. That spring simply rides in a channel or a groove underneath, and it comes out by simply prying off against the side. That's the spring, and again back into the parts bucket. Here's your little click mechanism that works on the teeth on that knob, and then we have some drags and some metal washers and some composite drags underneath here. So we're just going to take these out and make sure that they get properly serviced. I'm having a little trouble getting that eared washer out. There we go. One more. So this is a nice setup. This is a quality reel. It's got a lot of drags in it. Always nice to see that. Okay, so with that, we want to just make sure what we have here. These are pretty much a felt washer, kind of a complex. So we're just going to put a little bit of oil on these. Let's just lay this out for you. So metal, felt, solid, felt, eared, felt, solid. So that's the strain on these. So the first one in is an eared washer, which becomes the base for the drag system. Then we go to a felt washer. I'm going to put a little bit of oil on that felt washer to keep it lubricated. Solid washer. Felt washer. We're making sure that all of these are clean while we do this. A little bit of oil to keep that one fresh. Eared washer again. Now if you don't work on these frequently, one of the things to do is take pictures along the way. Take it with your cell phone. Take it with your take it with a digital camera. That's what I'm doing here. Basically, I'm using a digital camera to do that. But take pictures so that you know the order and sequence that you remove the pieces and parts, so that you can put them back together in the same order. And also, if you're using that parts tray, if you come to find out that you have an extra piece or a part around and you don't know where that came from, that's always a good time to do that. Okay, so this is service then. We're going to go ahead and put the tooth ratchet back in. That little ratchet makes noise when the drag is loosened. There's a little clicker on the bottom of the spool here that engages that tooth ratchet, makes a little noise to let you know that the spool is despooling because it's being pulled out by a fish or anything else for that matter. And then we're going to just go line this back up, and we're going to just put this back on. This has got a half case rather than a full through case, so we can take the bottom of the reel apart without removing the spool and that. And for a quick service, if you know your drags are okay, all you need to do is pull the spool, the nut, the rotor, and then you'll have the access to that bearing to do the lubrication there. This is a nice reel. I like this. Most easy cast reels, this function. Most of those reels are lower end reels, and they usually see that that function on the rear drive reels as opposed to the top-sided drags, which we just serviced there. So a little bit on the higher end for those that like the easy cast function, and pretty impressed so far with the quality that I'm seeing in this reel. Okay, I'm taking a bump guard off. That's another sign of quality. A lot of the low-end reels will not have the bump guard. They'll simply have the graphite case, and if you smack that graphite case from time to time, you risk breaking that. So the bump guard is just an extra level of protection there. The half case has 4 screws to it. These happen to be Phillips head screws. So I've got my Phillips head screwdriver here. We're going to pull them out. A lot of folks ask, how about a mechanical screwdriver or a battery operated one? I tend to stay away from that. One, I enjoy working with my hands, but two, I've also come to find out that those things have a lot of torque in them. And from the taking it out, not a problem as much as the putting it in. If you put it in and you over torque these screws, sometimes you can break a case. Sometimes you can warp the case. Just something to, an extra level of precaution. If you can do it by hand, do it. If you need to use the mechanical screwdriver because of hand strength, go ahead and do that, but leave that last part off. You know, stop at a turn short and just finish it with your hand screwdriver, and you'll be better for it. I always like to look at case screws when I take them out. These 4 are identical, but sometimes manufacturers will use a short screw, and you just need to be aware of that so that when you go to put them back, you know the place to put them back. Okay, here's the mechanism that runs that always returns this thing back to the set's position. We have 2 drives off of that. We have a double-toothed main gear. One of them is running the drive for the anti-reverse, the other for the fall. We have a bearing on the back. I'm going to go oil. Now, if you just were servicing this quickly and you didn't want to take that rotor off, you actually could come in underneath here and put a shot of oil on the bearing on the pinion, and that's kind of a quick service. I want to make sure that we have some grease on this because we don't there. I'm going to use a Penn Precision Reel Grease. It's a blue grease. Any manufacturer's real grease will just do fine, but make sure that it's a real grease. not a automotive grease or general purpose mechanical grease. Checking the teeth on this to make sure that there's no damage, and this is fine, both sides. And then we can put a little bit of oil, of the grease on that. This main gear here, this has a little wire on it that controls the anti-reverse function. Stopping. You'll see it here in detail. See if I can show that to you. It should show up this way, but there's a little wire loop here. You need to make sure that that wire loop is placed into the notch on the anti-reverse here. You can see it by where I'm putting my screwdriver. If that wire does not wind up in here, the anti-reverse will not work. The manufacturers provide you with a look-through on these main drives where they use that technology. You'll see a hole in here. That's what the hole is doing. It allows you to view through and see the wire that needs to be inserted into that little hole in the drive. I think you probably see it better this way, maybe because of the dark on the reel. So when we go back to reinsert that, we're going to make sure that that's appropriate as well. And then we're going to grab just a little bit of grease, put it on the main gear studs, and we can reinstall this. So it's a fairly easy process on this reel. Nothing really has to be done from any tear down beyond what we've just done here. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall. Now I can see this from the side case with that wire, so I really don't need to look through the hole, but just understanding that this is not an unusual type of mechanical setup. And if you find a reel with that situation, know that that's what that hole is doing there. Most of them will have a wire behind it. Okay, the side plate has a bearing on it. I just oiled that up. There's a hole in the side plate here for that other drive gear. You want to make sure that that gets on there. And then we can just button this reel up. So that's what we're just doing now. It's snapped in nicely. Again, we noted that the 4 side plate screws are the same, so it doesn't matter what sequence you put it in. And back to my comment before about the mechanical screwdriver. If you are using a battery-powered screwdriver, go ahead and drive these in, but don't drive them home. Make sure that the last piece of this gets turned in manually as opposed to mechanically. It'll just save you some aggravation. It'll keep the tolerances right. It'll keep the torque proper. And you won't have to worry about shattering, bending, warping, or otherwise that I've seen come in on some of these reels. So my impression of this Abu Garcia Cardinal Max Gold, very nice for a reel that has that easy cast function. It's high end. There's a lot of bearings in this reel, which is somewhat unusual for a 20 or 30 size reel with the easy cast function on it. And it looks like a solid performer, so easy enough to maintain. We're going to go ahead and put the bump guard back on. I'm going to put the handle on, and that's the servicing of this reel. So I like this reel. I really do not know what the cost of this reel is. Most of the time these easy cast reels tend to be the rear drag lever operated from underneath, and they tend to be relatively inexpensive on the lower end of the price points. So I would say if you find one of these new or used, in this case this is a used one that a customer brought in for service, but this is a smooth operator, and with that little service, that simple amount of some oil and grease and know-how, this one's ready for another season or two to come. So if you have one, I hope I've encouraged you to go ahead and service it and do what's required. If you don't have one and you find one out there, I think it's a solid purchase, and certainly will last for years given the proper maintenance of that. So if you've enjoyed this, please like it. If you want to see more of these, please subscribe to my channel. And with that, I'm going to thank you for viewing the video. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you again.